Uh, That's how it always happens. Um, I am told that we have a birthday in the room. Where's Gloria Gladstone Billings? Happy birthday. Still young after all these years, right? Um, Welcome to this session about what to do about and with AI in education, challenges and opportunities for AI in teaching and learning. I'm Ken Kadinger. I'm a professor of human-computer interaction and psychology at Carnegie Mellon University. And I'm super pleased to have a great set of panelists who I'll be introducing later, as well as three of the Academy's fellows who are going to give lightning talks. In our schedule here, action-packed schedule, I'll give some introductory remarks, and then I'm going to do a little bit of an unusual thing to get questions from you at the beginning. We won't answer them. We'll just collect some questions, and then the panelists and the fellows will try to address some of those during their remarks. We'll have some panel discussion and come back to you. So AI is a hot topic these days, and especially with the emergence of ChatGPT about a year ago. It's almost precisely a year ago. But you want to be clear that AI in education is a longstanding field. It's about a 40-plus year field. Thank you, Brian, for nodding. And so I thought I'd bring these two things together to see what ChatGPT would say about the 40-year history. So, you know, I hope many of you have tried this out. You should. You just go to the ChatGPT website that I'm using 3.5 here. I typed write a 2-paragraph summary of the 40-plus years of AI in education, starting with the 1982 book on intelligent tutoring systems. I hit go, and this is the live video. So it thinks for a while, and it starts, and boom, 6 seconds later, we've got 2-paragraph summary of the history. So what did it say? The field of AI in education research has witnessed over 4 decades. If you've read these things, it's typically quite fluent English. It sounds great. It's not always right. Like Gagne was not the author of this book. He did contribute a chapter, but it's actually mostly gets it right. In fact, intelligent tutoring systems did utilize AI to provide personalized and adaptive instruction to students. They proved to be effective tools for enhancing learning outcomes, and they did so by tailoring content and feedback to individual students. And I can't complain that it mentioned some of our own work on cognitive tutors. It highlights emergent research areas like educational data mining and learning analytics, with really emphasis on how data could be used to improve these platforms and also improve the context in which they're used in school and other educational settings. It advances like the machine learning and natural language processing that has made this recent craze in generative AI possible, but also computer vision. And I want to point out that with an example that's another area that is valuable for us. It notes influence on practice, widespread adoption of online learning platforms, and importantly, it cites some of the ongoing challenges: student privacy, ethical considerations, and digital divide. And I think we're going to try to cover these things in our panel, but let me just give you a quick review of some of these things. So those cognitive tutors, what are they about? Tailoring content and feedback to individual student needs is a nice summary from ChatGPT. So in this course, students do a lot of different kinds of practice. Sometimes they're more practicing their overhand serve, more isolated practice. This one's a little bit more project-based, or analyzing a authentic problem. They're using multiple representations, tables, graphs, equations. And as they're working, they're getting feedback from the tutor as needed from the online tutor. And when they're approaching challenging questions that they might be uncertain about, they can get instruction in the context of learning by doing, adapted to their needs rather than, you know, upfront, sage on this stage kind of thing, or in addition to that. The progress is monitored such that a profile of each student's strengths and weaknesses is created so that new problems can be selected. And these kinds of technologies have been highly evaluated in school contexts. The cognitive tutors, we started getting into the Pittsburgh Public Schools in the early 90s. There was this very large randomized field trial, 140 schools that ran that involved 70 schools using the full cognitive tutor algebra course, not just the technology, but textbook and teacher professional development materials, in an unfair nutshell to a very complicated design. There was evidence of a doubling over the school year. AI and Ed also contributes to educational research. We had this paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy earlier this year, where 27 data sets from these kinds of online tutoring systems were analyzed. We were looking for variations in student learning rate. And this is an image of 4 of those, where each of these lines is a log odds transformed learning curve for each student. And what was really striking in this data is how parallel those lines are, how similar learning rates are across students, which I think is an important message for equity, in that it looks like any student who puts in the learn by doing effort can learn in these domains. But there are huge differences in intercept, which is also an important thing for us to address. AI Ed is more than just ChatGPT. Here's an example of a mixed reality system where there's a camera here that AI Vision is guiding this AI agent to help the students in inquiry where they're learning science by doing science. And if the technology cooperates, I'll give you a short little video of. So they've got the contrasting cases, towers that you'll see, and they're being asked, which one's going to fall first on this shaking table? They're predicting now. So you can see there that AI is giving feedback to the student. It's turning the machine off when the tower falls. I can see that. There are also activities where kids are building. This kid is not only very excited, but let me skip that. When they're building towers, we see lots of evidence that the science comes to bear in their engineering design. He says, all my towers are staying up. I have a bigger base, which is one of the principles. Don't have time to go into the data, but a lot of experiments showing against good controls that this enhances both scientific outcomes and learning outcomes. Finally, AI and Ed can support teaching, and you'll hear other examples of this. This one is one where teachers were enabled with smart glasses, where they could see an augmented view of their classroom, where these struggle icons are over their students' heads, indicating which students are needing different kinds of engagement or math help. And the powerful thing about this is it shifts teachers' attention to lower prior opportunity students. Students with lower pretests are getting more attention from teachers who are enabled with this struggle detector. And the consequences are quite powerful for pre-post learning gain in this math area, like a 3 times bigger gain compared to control conditions. So a lot of great opportunities for AI. It contributes to educational practice and research. It's more than just generative AI, ChatGPT. It can help teachers in teaching, but there are challenges that remain. And for that, we want to go to our panel. But as I said, wanted to first collect some questions from you in this area that could help guide the panelists. And we're not going to answer them right now. Just if you could raise some questions for us, we'll collect those ideas and be prepared to answer them. So do we have any questions? Great question. Yes, thank you.
That the panelists will address with the explosion of AI in education, what those of us engaged with that should be doing, saying about the incredibly high carbon footprint of AI given the climate crisis.
about a presentation from Dr. Jenny Higgs. She's here yesterday, and wondering about the role of teacher, parent, and community voice in shaping conversations around AI right now.
Good morning. How might AI help us reimagine pedagogy in the classroom? In what ways might we think about writing differently?
Super. We'll have more opportunities. Please go ahead.
Interested in how can universities craft policies that acknowledge the great help that ChatGPT and other generative AI can help students with disabilities, with specifically writing disabilities. So how can that be used as a positive tool, as an accommodation for students, while at the same time helping all students create general writing that is original?
Right.
Hi, thanks. In what ways do current AI technologies sort of change the boundary between what are productive disciplinary practices for kids to engage in versus what pieces could be offloaded to a computational device, kind of making an analogy to, like, it may not be so important to teach long division anymore, or people might argue about that given prevalence of calculators. So another part of that would be, which aspects of complex cognition can the AI actually support with, and which things are like currently beyond what it is able to do?
Yep, great.
Sorry. I'm wondering, and this is more philosophical in nature, but what's left in terms of the student learning when the technology is not there?
That's a great set of questions, and we see a nice span across broader educational issues related to social justice and technology and curriculum integration, curriculum goals, all important questions. Our panelists we selected to get a number of dimensions of diversity. We have industry representation, academic representation. We have some more less junior faculty and some more junior faculty involved, and from different areas. And for some reason, PowerPoint, oh, there's Ryan's affiliation. So Kristen DeCerbo is the Chief Learning Officer at Khan Academy, but I do want to mention she has an EdPsych PhD, so has academic connections. Shamya Kamrambaya is an Assistant Professor of EdPsych at the University of Wisconsin. Nia Nixon is Assistant Professor of Education at the University of California, Irvine. And Ryan Baker is a Professor of Learning and Teaching and Literacy at the University of Pennsylvania. So we're going to now move to panelist opening remarks, and they'll each have 9 minutes, and then we'll have some time for you to ask clarifying questions before we move on to the next panelist. So invite Kristen up.
Fingers crossed that this works. Whoa. Right, we're almost there. Okay, good morning. Oh, wait, should I be turning this on? There we go. All right. So I think my role on this panel is to talk a bit about what this might look like out in the real world and what is particularly generative AI may look like. But I'd like to start a lot of my talks with a little bit of reflection on how we got here. This is a machine that was created in 1925 to help students learn. And basically, the role that you see there contained multiple choice questions. And students would use those levers on the right to be able to select which answer they think is correct. And the best part of this is that you could set behind the machine how many in a row you wanted to get right. And when you got that right, see that chute that's coming out the front? That would dispense candy if you got it. So I'm trying to hook this up to my laptop these days. You can, this is in the archives of the National Museum of American History. And so I think the point I want to make, though, is we have been looking to technology for a long time to help with learning. And given that we don't have one of these candy dispensing machines in every classroom for every student, we should be looking with a lens of skepticism at what technology can do. And I say this as someone who works at an educational technology organization. So with that in mind, we tend to start at thinking at Khan Academy, what do we know about student learning? And if we have a new technology come in, are there ways that that new technology can help us address some of the problems that we have seen that are obstacles for student learning? So these are some of the things that guide our thinking and about student learning. One, we know that students learn more when they're cognitively engaged with the material to be learned. And we rely quite a bit on the work of Mickey Chi, particularly that ICAP framework, and thinking about how we move from passive to active to constructive to interactive. With technology, we've always struggled to get to that last interactive space that we know that human tutors can get to. And when generative AI came in, that was one of the potential places we thought we could be starting to move in being able to capture some of those capabilities. We know we want to think about students working on material that's at the edge of what they can learn. And if you're at the edge of what you can do, you're going to need a little bit of support. And that's really hard in a classroom of 35 students for one teacher to give that little bit of support to the teacher, to every student in that classroom. Ken talked about the immediate feedback. And some of the intelligent tutoring tools have been good at giving kind of that step-by-step feedback. That's a key piece of things, but also doing it in a way that feels like a conversation you would have with a human. And again, that's another piece that this generative AI move has the potential to do. And finally, that idea of what motivates students. One of the biggest questions we get from teachers is, how do I keep my students motivated? And we know that's a big piece of that when we go even back to good expectancy value theory. Do you expect to be successful, and do you value the things that you're doing? And how might we be able to use some of these new AI tools to help students see not just connections to what they know, but also other ways that they might be able to value the activities that they're doing? So that said, fingers crossed, everyone, I'm going to give you a little bit of a demo of the things that we have been doing at Khan Academy. So last September, we got a call from OpenAI, and they said, we've just finished training this new model. We're thinking about its applications, including in education. This was a call with Sal Khan and I, and said, would you like access to this new model? This is the model we now know as GPT-4. So last September, we got access to a Slack bot where we could Slack back and forth with GPT-4. And we spent a weekend going, oh my gosh, look at it do this, look at it do that. Sal wrote a poem for his wife. All those kind of things we all did when we first got access to these kinds of new models. But pretty quickly, we said, you know what, this is great for answering questions, but could it act more like a tutor? Could we think about how it can address some of these pieces? And so we started working. We basically threw out our roadmap of all the things we were going to build last year. And OpenAI said, we're launching GPT-4 on March 14th. We'd like you to launch along with us and think about what you could do to do that. So we spent about 6 months building what we now call Conmigo. For those who know Spanish, Conmigo means with me. So that's a piece of this. If you are familiar, this is a general page on Khan Academy. So if you are doing, this is our Algebra 1 course, which is one of our most used courses. Unit 2 is solving equations and inequalities. Up here is where you're tracking your skills of whether they're mastered, proficient, etc. And you can watch videos that are over here on the left, or engage in exercises, practice on what you're doing. And the practice for this particular skill is fairly procedural. It's about, are you understanding the foundations of how you solve an equation with variables on both sides? To the question about, are students really going to need to know this? We argue that in order to do those higher level thinking tasks, you have to have an understanding of the foundational skills. So we think, then that's debatable, understood. But we think it is still important for students to know how to do these things. But what I want to show you is Conmigo. So down here, this little icon is Conmigo. And if you pop it up, what's happening here is that, let's say I'm the student. This is live, so I have, as you know, large language models can give kind of any response. But a student's working on this says, I'm stuck. So what's happening here is we send I'm stuck along with the problem that they're working on, so 16 minus 2r, et cetera, then combined with the answer to this problem, because we know the answer, and the hints, which is basically the worked solution for this problem, we send all of that, plus a prompt that's about 500 words of how to act like a tutor. And that's where we drew in all of the research that we've been doing about what good human tutors do. And we, meaning all of us who are in this space. So all of the folks that have been working on understanding human tutors, we drew a lot of work of Art Gracer's research and on all of the things that they had done about dialogue-based tutors to tell the model what to do and what not to do. One of the things what not to do is do not give the student the answer. If you just typed this problem into ChatGPT, it would work through the problem and give you the answer. This says, oh, no worries at all. We all get stuck sometimes. That's totally okay. It's part of the learning process, right? So what's got you scratching your head? Is it about the exercise with the variables on both sides or something else you need help with? This is why. So this is, I just said, oh, why is it doing that? That seems weird. This is in teacher mode. So I can also switch over to student mode and say I'm stuck. And it's sending which persona I am. It's a little unplanned demonstration of teacher mode versus student mode. All right, no worries, let's break it down. The goal is to find the value of R. Do you know the first step to solve this equation? No. So that's okay. First, we need to combine like terms. Can you try that? What's a term? So you can see how it starts leading students through the answer's great. A term is a number of variable or numbers of variables multiplied together. In this equation, can you spot the like terms? So we can keep going with that. I'm going to show you one more thing, and I have 1 minute. So I'm going to just quickly show, some folks were talking about teachers and how teachers can know what students are doing. So one of the things we have is a chat history. So you can look up, a student can see their own chat history. And so, hey, I had a good conversation with Conmigo about this the other day. You can go back to it. Teachers can also see the student's chat history, or parents can see their student's chat history. So they have some understanding of what's going on. And if I'm a teacher, oh, I got to switch back to my teacher mode. I can get a summarization of my student's chat history that will tell me what are the most common questions they're asking, where are they getting stuck, what do their conversations look like? So we can start to feed that information back in. It can also help me as a teacher create a lesson plan, write learning objectives, unpack those standards into learning objectives, co-create a rubric. So we're thinking about this as a tutor for students and as an assistant for teachers, but generally want to kind of leave you with the thoughts, you probably have a million questions, but I'm going to leave you basically with the thought that we want to consider how we can use the artificial intelligence to help enhance human intelligence and human potential. And I will end there. Thank you. We have time for one question?
No. Any clarifying questions for Kristen? Very clear, apparently.
No questions.
Can you all hear me okay? If you don't have any
Is this better? Now? Yeah, okay. All right. That's a perfect segue for my presentation on human AI synergy in augmenting teaching and learning practices. Like Kristen mentioned, I am also interested in the use of AI to augment human practices in teaching and learning. But let me begin by sharing my path to this work. I started my journey in AI for education around 8 years back as a computer scientist. I was excited about building predictive models of complex educational constructs such as affect, persistence, motivation, and math success. But as a doctoral student in learning sciences around the same time, I was also introduced to the inextricable link between learning and context, which made me question the role of context in model development from student data. In my dissertation research with my advisor, Ryan Baker here, I studied how ignoring learner context in the design and development of AI tutors could introduce harmful biases in these models. And my work demonstrated how biases are introduced well before model development in sources such as theories, design, and data collection methods. In classrooms, however, there is context beyond student AI interaction. Human mediation involving interpersonal interactions is key for AI tools to be used appropriately. Like how one of my teachers said it, it's a student-teacher AI interaction in class, or student-teacher AI partnership in classrooms. And today I'll present 3 cases of augmenting teacher practices with AI support. In all these 3, we were interested in studying AI augmented teacher practices and asking this question of how does AI use change teaching and learning practices in ways that lead to better student learning. The first study involves augmenting teacher intelligence on student learning. So for instance, what if we took the models that I mentioned earlier and turned the analytics back to teachers? And that's exactly what Lumilo did, the one from Ken's presentation, which is a mixed reality teacher awareness tool. In a controlled experiment, Ken Holstein showed that presenting teachers with real-time analytics about student learning, metacognition, and behavior had a positive impact on student learning. But why? What changes did it make to teacher practices? In this study, we conceptualized human AI partnered noticing within Vanis and Sherin's framework and extended it to include AI augmentation. For example, AI augmentation could support teacher attention by highlighting moments in student learning that they may consider more noteworthy than others. An example of this in Lumilo are the indicator icons above an individual student, indicating struggle, hint abuse, or unproductive persistence. Similarly, teacher tools as a virtual space can be designed to support teacher needs for additional information before, during, or after constructing interactions with the student in the physical space. What the tool also afforded us is the multimodal measurement of teacher noticing in the forms of gaze, physical proximity to a student, and deep dive, which is teacher-initiated lookup of individual students' recent learning. And let me highlight one of our results here. And we were comparing the condition with analytics and the condition without analytics. In both students, teacher is wearing a mixed reality tool, but one has analytics and one doesn't. And in the condition with analytics, we noticed that there was increasingly focused noticing that was happening that was related to high struggle in students. And this is when a teacher probably pays attention to a struggling student that is alerted by the indicator icon and looks up their recent learning and visits them to provide support. In contrast to this, without analytics, teachers noticed high prior knowledge students more. From post-study interviews with teachers, we know that teachers checked upon high-achieving students in a row to calibrate their assessment of the class progress. This is where the teacher probably was spending more time figuring out where the class as a whole was at. We believe that such multimodal measures of teacher noticing could be a promising new direction in quantitatively operationalizing noticing. It may also reduce the burden on teachers to browse through hours of videos to reflect on their practices. And that brings me to the second study. where we try to augment teacher intelligence on their own practices in the classroom. AI tools in classrooms are designed to free up teachers' time so they can focus on students who need their time the most. But how do teachers use the time that is freed up by the AI tutor? Or also AI support through tools. What strategies lead to effective use of their time, and how can they improve on their practices? From teacher interviews, we know that teachers rely on two main signals broadly to decide which student to visit as they study with their computers. First, their prior knowledge, and second, their perception of student need while observing the class. While it is easy to notice, say, idleness through direct observation, teachers may find it hard to identify other needs, such as unproductive persistence or struggle, as students may appear to be engaged. To study this, we equipped a classroom with position sensors that collected teachers' XY coordinates using signal from tags that the teachers wore around their neck. And using this data, we detected teacher visits to students. And then we presented it to teachers in conjunction with student learning and engagement data. And reflecting on their visit patterns with this visualization, this teacher said, for instance, "Look at Kamar, I barely stopped by him. And here's the kid who is struggling, but I was hardly there. So I want to check in on him a little bit more often." Discussing potential classroom enactments, this teacher also shared that they would change the seating arrangement to sort of facilitate peer tutoring based on the close proximity to struggling students, and would probably also group multiple struggling students to provide conceptual intervention together. We have so far focused mostly on student learning and engagement in designing and studying AI-augmented teacher practices. But classrooms are social, cultural, political, and historical spaces where a teacher's professional vision dictates their noticing practices. Could we perhaps use AI support to understand and support cultural and ideological dimensions of what and how teachers notice? Switching gears, I want to present some new research my lab is exploring on augmenting teacher intelligence on AI tools themselves. Earlier this week, and not too far from here, President Biden and VP Harris announced an executive order on AI, and my Twitter since has gone off about all the critiques on technicality and whatnot, but this is a huge win for advocacy and safety. And I want to highlight two aspects that is relevant for us here. One is the potential transformative role AI could play in education, especially by creating resources to support educators deploying AI-enabled tools in their classrooms. And second, more importantly, on ensuring that we focus on the responsible use of AI that is safe, secure, and trustworthy. And my next project is about both of these. How do we equip teachers with tools that build their agency and trust in using AI for teaching and learning? Giant AI models like ChatGPT are far from being perfect. They are, as the creator of ChatGPT says, subject to errors and biases, but the issue is more complex than accuracy for education. Let me take an example from the context I'm studying. With my colleague Sadhna Puntambekar, I'm working with 5 Wisconsin teachers to develop AI support for science writing. In a 3-week inquiry-based learning unit on energy, students write and revise their essays with science explanations, and the AI model provides automated feedback. Teachers noted several benefits of using AI-enabled scaffolds, like how it saves time to provide more targeted support to students, or the elements of teacher-AI partnership. At the same time, teachers also noted some serious limitations ranging from errors, inconsistencies to missing capabilities, especially with variations in student writing. More importantly, we noticed that scaffolding priorities itself may vary by teacher. One teacher wanted their students to sound authentic to the task of building the roller coaster and express ideas that sound like them, as opposed to parroting out definitions, while another teacher emphasized that learning a common definition is more important. My lab is exploring a new paradigm for model evaluation that goes beyond the standard metrics to test model behaviors that is contextually relevant to the stakeholders. These may include simple behaviors like, is the model robust to the way middle schoolers write? Or can it handle situated descriptions? But also capabilities like, can it handle translanguaging between Spanish and English? Or can it handle students bringing their life experiences into these essays? We will be running studies with teachers to understand how they evaluate AI to identify benefits and harms to students, and also how working with model behaviors from a familiar context impact teachers' perception of AI trustworthiness. I can't end this presentation without thanking my wonderful set of grad students and collaborators and all the teachers who make this work possible. Thank you.
Question or
Can you guys hear me? No?
Better? Yeah, there we go. Good morning. I'm super excited to be here today. I'm Nia Nixon, and I'm from UCI. And today I wanted to talk about how we've been using AI to support our efforts to improve inclusion, mainly in teams or collaborative problem-solving context. So we're doing this because we're at a really unique place in history where we have advances in science and technology that have accelerated our reliance on virtual teams and their collaborative efforts to solve critical social, economic, and public health issues, as we've seen recently with COVID. And as a result, communication, collaboration, collaborative problem solving have really taken a principal place in both educational research and practice. And these environments hold the potential to create more equitable and inclusive peer interactions, but unfortunately, they're not typically characterized as such. So in team environments, and a lot of our research is in the context of STEM team environments, but women and underrepresented minorities face really unique barriers, including not feeling welcome to participate, limited opportunities to participate, lower sense of belonging and confidence. And the causes and consequences of this are pretty numerous and complex, but the way that we've approached it is kind of tackling the really foundational levels of any type of human interaction, and that is conversation, so communication. And in particular, we build computational models that allow us to quantify cognitive social processes. So the grand idea here was to capture the conversational patterns that are reflective of critical sociocognitive dynamics that allow us to understand the inclusion dynamics in large and small teams as they engage. So here is a pretty oversimplified version of the type of data you might get out of these types of interactions, where you have something like the speaker, the team that they're in, what they said, and the time that they said it. There's tons of rich information in here that traditional natural language processing tools or manual approaches don't allow us to capture. And so the goal is, or the challenge is, how do we go from this semi-unstructured data to something more meaningful, something that allows us to capture these critical sociocognitive dynamics as they unfold over time. So for instance, here we have person A, B, C, D, E engaging over time, and each one of those bubbles you can imagine is a contribution that somebody makes. And what we do with GCA, group communication analysis, is we quantify the semantic and conceptual meaning or overlap between utterances as they unfold over time, and then derive several different theoretically grounded measures of that interaction. And we do that using AI. We've done that for a while, as Ken hinted at too. This is not anything new. I've been doing this since I was an undergrad at University of Memphis. And so far we have 6 measures, but we're expanding that for group communication analysis. So the first one is just mere participation. This is a necessary but insufficient means to understand human interaction. The remaining measures come out of the discourse cohesion analysis, where we have responsivity measures. The first one being overall responsivity. So this is capturing the extent to which, when I say something, It is semantically related to the previous contributions from my peers. So am I attending to, building on and moving the conversation forward, or am I ignoring my peers? Also, we have a measure of internal cohesion. So the degree to which my current contribution, for instance, is semantically related to my own previous contributions. Again, this is coming out of the self-regulatory, like learning science literature. And then we have a measure of social impact. So this is capturing to the extent to which other people in this conversation value what I'm saying. So when I say something, is it semantically related to the subsequent contributions from other people in the team? So are people picking that up and moving the conversation forward or ignoring me? And then the remaining two measures come out of more the team science literature, where we have a measure of newness, because people in teams tend to always provide information that everybody already knows instead of that new novel information or expertise that they have. It's just like a psychological phenomena. So this is capturing whether or not we're providing new information or echoing what's already been said. And then a measure of communication density. So these 6 sociocognitive processes measures have really allowed us to tackle this idea of inclusion. A big missing component from this is emotions. So we're expanding the measures quite a bit right now. But so far, we've analyzed over 8,000 individuals and about 6,000 teams. From everything from small group interactions to more distributed interactions that take place in massive open online courses or crowd-based design networks. And explored the practical values of these measures on both individual student and overall team performance. So do they matter? Do shifts and changes in these dynamics have any type of impact for student learning, for student creativity or innovation, both at the individual level and at the team level? And then today I'm going to jump really quickly into inclusion. So we have kind of a 3-phase plan with our inclusion research. The first one being identifying differences. So this is, spoiler alert, there are differences between men and women and underrepresented minorities and majority students. And we've seen these consistently across a number of different data sets. They seem to be pretty stable, unfortunately, I guess. And then the second phase is kind of creating these inclusive analytics or really modeling the impact of those differences. So I'm only going to talk briefly about something from phase 1 and then what our thinking in phase 2 and 3 today. So phase 3 is, okay, we already, and again, another spoiler alert, these things do matter. They impact women and underrepresented minorities' sense of belonging, self-efficacy, propensity to stay in STEM, and actually remain in STEM, like a host of really meaningful outcomes of any type of interaction. So then we're at the phase 2, like where we start to explore, okay, there are differences, they do matter. What do we do about it? How can we make this better? Okay, so a lot of this work initially was motivated by this paper, which I suggest everybody go read. I thought it was really cool. But Niljana Dasgupta is a colleague of mine at University of Amherst. And she's done a lot. She's a social psychologist. She's done a ton of really interesting inclusion and equity research where she's looked at, for instance, in this paper, gender group composition. So when you have engineering teams and they have 3 females or 1 male, or 3 males and 1 female, and then she has this host of social psych, really rich measures that she calls STEM psychological dispositions, which are basically like sense of belonging, self-efficacy, propensity to stay in STEM, all of these things. And then in addition to that, she looked at language, but she looked at it at this really surface level that most of the research in this area has done, where she just looked at how much should women speak and how much should men speak. And of course, she found some really striking differences in that. And so I was motivated by this paper because I wanted to do it, but I wanted to do it with some deeper level NLP measures as captured by group communication analysis. So we did a similar setup where we had 3 females and 1 male. Or 3 males, 1 female. So to orient you, you're see on your left, you're seeing the female majorities, and on your right, you're seeing the female minorities. So the first thing to take note is that the major differences are in those deeper level sociocognitive measures of social impact, responsivity, and internal cohesion. interestingly, like a lot of the stereotypical things about language and gender, you might have already heard that like men dominate work conversations or that women talk too much at home. Again, all of these are just a number of words, but that participation measure in our analyses really flips and flops. Like it's not consistent. What is consistent are these differences in how the deeper level nature of how men and women are communicating. And the second thing is that women appear to engage more productively compared to their male peers, and that men actually perform better when they are in the minority. So men seem to engage more productively when they are with 3 females and when they are with 2 other males and 1 female. So more women is better for everyone, which we knew, but now we can quantify, so that's pretty cool. And so anyway, so like I said, I don't have enough time to tell you everything, but we've seen these results repeatedly. And so now we're at a stage of that 2 and 3 where we're like, okay, to what extent do these things matter? A lot of our initial findings are suggesting they have really big implications for how women feel, and I also didn't even get to talk about the racial differences, but how minority students feel when they leave a conversation, when they leave a collaboration based on just how people are talking to each other. So we're building lots of iterative experiments to actually quantify that sense of belonging, decrease or increase depending on the nature of the interaction, looking at different types of feedback approaches. One of the things that we are very much aware of here is I came from a background in intelligent tutoring systems where we gave a lot of feedback on you got something wrong or you have a misconception or whatever. The type of feedback we're talking about here is really much more sensitive. It's not whether or not you got it right or wrong. We're approaching this with the knowledge that we're going to have to really explore a lot of different ways to provide feedback because we don't want it to land in the wrong way. I don't think that men go in most of the time. I don't think that men go into conversations thinking, I'm going to be a jerk. It's that we're unaware and we're not taught how to collaborate or communicate. Anyway, so we're thinking about teacher dashboards where they have information about both how engineering teams are performing on their project, but also these sociocognitive processes that they can become aware of, or student-facing feedback similar to your Fitbit or something. It's like, hey, you're kind of accidentally ignoring Danielle over there. Why don't you follow up on that really great suggestion she had about X, Y, and Z? We're also looking at behavioral nudges and gamified versions for younger populations. And with that, I will say thank you to my wonderful lab and all of you, and see if there are any questions.
Just one, wondering if you have sort of done any validity analyses of these particular metrics.
Yes,
of
yes. So I have a paper on that. When I first developed the methodology, I did extensive validity and generalization measures, tracked it through multiple data sets to make sure that they were consistent. So, yeah, thank you.
It connected earlier, but it's not wanting to connect right now. Hopefully it'll figure itself out. Something broke it. I don't think it was your fault, but I guess I can get started and we can hopefully get some tech support up here at some point. I see him coming. Thank you. So, as Dr. Kadinger mentioned, artificial intelligence in education is not new. And there's been a range of different types of AI and ed that have become prominent, including intelligent tutoring systems and adaptive learning systems, automated essay scoring, grading, and feedback. That's not working. Previous generation systems and research tell us how to develop learning technologies that actually help students learn, as in the work by Gracer and colleagues that informed Conmigo. But new generation technologies like large language models make it much cheaper and easier to build these systems. And they also make it possible to do some things that just weren't really feasible before. And Conmigo is one exciting demonstration of what's possible, but it's not just the magical large language models like Dr. DeCerbo's talk shows. They build on past theory and empirical findings as part of their approach to enhancing learning. And another demonstration, which I have a great picture up here right now, is GPTA, our teaching assistant at Penn in my courses. It's not the only large language model TA being piloted this fall. There's another one being piloted at Harvard. Oh, that looks even worse. And GPTA is able to do things like answer conceptual questions about the assignment. All right, thank you. Yeah. That rattled me. It can answer conceptual questions about assignments. It can help students think through their work on an assignment. In this case, it's showing an example of a student thinking about the relationship between variables in a data set. And the way we make it work is that because large language models can get things wrong sometimes, we don't just unleash it on the students. We have all posts be approved and sometimes not approved by the professor and or the human TAs. And sometimes it does go off the rails. We find that we use a lot of its posts, but for example, in this case, which you can't really read, it tries to pick an argument with one of our TAs over when her office hours are offered. So TA says, my office hours will be Friday afternoons, and GPTA says, well, that's awesome, you're making time for your students, but have you talked to the students about whether Friday afternoon is convenient for them? So we do suppress it sometimes. So does it work? Not every response is perfect, and we don't always use its recommended posts, but it saves me and the TAs a lot of time, because some of the posts it writes would probably take us 20 minutes to produce, to kind of study what's going on. And there have been cases where a student says, my code's not doing what I want, I don't understand, and it can just explain it. And that would probably take us a lot of time to figure out. And it also provides faster responses to students, because let's say it's 4 a.m. in the morning, the student posts, well, I might not feel like making a 20-minute post at 4 in the morning, but I might feel up to pulling up my phone when I wake up and saying, oh, there's something here, let me really scan it really quick. And I've done that, so students are getting these responses late with the TAs and early with me that they wouldn't get. How does it work? How well does it work? Well, we're collecting data this semester on student attitudes pre-post with surveys. We're also looking at the things like how quickly students get their posts responded to, how many posts students make. It looks like anecdotally students are posting a lot more this semester than previous semesters because they're getting so much more feedback on their posts. And we don't really expect learning gains per se, because it's more of a convenience than something we really couldn't provide, but we expect to see a lot of improvements. We're expecting kind of what we're seeing anecdotally, a lot of improvements in the experience and discourse. We're going to be scaling it to 2 other courses this spring, where we'll be using it to do something we couldn't easily do, where students turn in complex assignments in these classes. We have this we've had in the past this iterative process of getting feedback from the TAs or instructors, which takes a while, right? You imagine like 60+ students, writing detailed feedback for them is really time consuming. GPTA will provide them fast feedback to do fast iterations before it gets to the TAs and humans for a round. And that might have more potential to improve learning gains. Some other potentially interesting work along these lines at our center that I wanted to talk quickly about. Another such project is a project where we provide automated feedback in a relatively less supported language. Most of the work in intelligent tutoring systems has been in English. There's been a little bit in a few other languages, but it's been very heavily English. In this study, we were able to get GPT to provide feedback in Polish for Polish computer science undergraduates, where it takes their programming assignments and provides feedback on not only kind of what the compiler errors are, which a standard compiler does, but explains what those mean and what might be happening in the code to cause that. And we found that it led to better performance during learning. That's not shocking. And we found that there was initial worse performance after the hints were turned off. But after 6 exercises with the hints turned off, the experimental group was able to iterate to the correct answer much faster, even with the hints turned off. And there was an audience question at the very beginning, what's left in terms of cognition when the technology is turned off? In this case, we found that by explaining what an error means in more detail and why it might be occurring, students are actually learning something that makes them better at working even when it's gone. Not going to see it in every case, but it seemed to work there. And that was a paper we published at ICC 2023. We also have been working on human AI partnership, like the kind of partnerships that Dr. Karambai talked about for qualitative coding of data, where qualitative coding is those here who have done it know, thank you. It can be very time consuming and hard to do. And we've been using GPT to help us, for example, refine code books. So when we ask GPT to code something and it doesn't get it right, we can ask it to explain why and ask it to make suggestions for how the code book could be made more concrete and more precise. We've also used it to explain and resolve disagreements between human coders along the same lines, where we can give a definition, we can give the codes the 2 human coders gave, and ask it why that disagreement might be occurring. And it's worth noting that ChatGPT's performance at coding itself is slightly worse than previous generation methods, a paper we gave at ICQE this summer. So it's not that we're going to just replace coding with GPT, which a lot of people have tried. It's actually not terrible. It's pretty fast. If you want lots of slightly lower quality coding, it's great. But it can help us do the human-human coding better, which is particularly valuable. So our next steps are using it to automatically discover codes in qualitative data. And then we're going to be doing, we are in the process of doing a systematic approach to study a continuum where on one end, the human being selects the codes and we just go with those. To the other end, GPT selects the codes and we go with those. To 2 in between, where either GPT selects the codes and the human refines, or the human selects the codes and GPT refines. And we're looking at that in terms of how similar are the codes it produces, how good is human iterator reliability. In our first round, we just finished the first round of iterator reliability, and it was about the same in all 4. Not as good as we'd want it in any of those 4 cases. And so now we're doing the iterative process that we would normally do in codebook refinement to see. How good is the automated coding for all these? And how interesting are these codes to independent, single-blinded human researchers who don't know what the source of the codes are? We're going to be doing all of this. We are burning through qualitative coders in this process because we're doing everything with multiple people. So we've got this giant team working on it, and we'll see what we find. So in some conclusions, thank you. There's lots of ways large language models can be useful in education. They make it faster and easier to develop high-quality learning experiences. I didn't mention time of development, but GPTA was something we developed in 2 months over the summer, abandoning our first approach 3 weeks in and picking a new approach. The coding thing, runcodeapp.org, that we developed took about a month to develop. The qualitative coding stuff, really quick to build. It's insane. Like the saying always used to be, a graduate student's 5 years of study for like a year of content, and 5 person years for a year of content, and we're doing everything in like a couple person months. So that really is exciting. New things, much faster, not a magic box. So AI and Ed, artificial intelligence education, used to be a ton of effort and really hard to get right. And now it's just really, really hard to get right. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Ryan. Looks like you have a clarification question, Danielle.
Hey, thank you. As always, you're ahead of the game. I have a question about security and equity. In your for your course and for some of the analyses, do you have like a secure sandbox? Did you create an enterprise license? And then if no, how did you get the IRB for all that? And then if yes, my question, I was going to raise it at the beginning, but I thought it was not fair. But just to say, how are we going to ensure that universities and public institutions have the secure access to an LLM such that they can do all this great stuff?
Great questions. Can I answer really quickly? Yeah. So the the open source things that you can easily put on your own server and run aren't as good as GPT at the moment. We did not have an enterprise license, but we consented every student. So because this is an experiment in the class, we went to RB and we got a protocol and we consented every student. Now, if somebody had said, I don't want to do this, we would have had to find some other way for them to talk to the TAs, but nobody had any objections in this study.
So I hope you get a sense that this is a super fast moving field. A lot of things you've heard about have been happening even in the last few months and last year. And one related element of that is our young researchers are engaged in using these tools. So we thought we'd give some time to our fellows to tell us how they've been engaging with uses of AI. And we have 3 of the fellows here. We're each going to give real lightning talk, 3-minute lightning talks. And we're going to start with Aurelia Jonathan from Harvard University, a PhD student in culture, institutions, and society.
Great. So hopefully you can hear me. As Ken said, my name is Aurelia Jonathan. I'm a PhD candidate at the Graduate School of Education at Harvard. And I'm really glad this presentation is 3 minutes because I can't pretend to be an expert on AI and also using AI. But I'm going to talk a little bit today about using AI for qualitative data. So actually really nice segue because I've just started to kind of scrape the surface with using some of this AI work. And so I've always used Otter AI. I think many people who do qualitative work are familiar with Otter AI as a transcription service. For context, my work focuses on teachers and history teaching in South Sudan. I think specifically about the contributions history teaching and pedagogy and curriculum can make toward peace building in South Sudan. And so I've used Otter AI to transcribe interviews. However, when you have a large quantity of interviews, AI doesn't actually work with accents, particularly African accents. So one of the positives of having Otter AI do some of this transcription is I can start to look at some of the data, but alas, the 100+ interviews I collected, most did not run through Otter AI. So one of the interesting things about using Otter AI is that it will always create this summary at the top, and that I think is generated by AI. So some of the codes that were provided are a really nice jump starting point for thinking about what codes I might start to use. So you do see some words that are interesting to me, like insecurity, social studies, textbooks, migration, leaders, participation. But you also see words like Met and ministry that don't really have anything to do with the study. And so you can see there are sometimes flaws. The other thing I'll say is just the transcriptions themselves, lots of mistakes and sometimes completely unreadable, like, and that is definitely not great. The more helpful thing I've found is I've been using Atlas TI to code my work. And recently there was an update, and I think it's in beta testing. I really don't know. I'm just, figuring this out. And I have been trying to code all of these interviews and observations on my own. So over 100 interviews, over 70 classroom observations, and it's very lonely work. And I don't think we talk about that enough in supporting graduate students. And I do not work in a team. It's just me, myself, and I. And so I've had a lot of trouble knowing whether what I'm seeing is right or feeling confident in my codes. And so I actually just initially, this is an observation I did, and there are a couple of other codes you can't see here, but I had selected this text and I had coded it as ethnic groups and South Sudanese identity. Recently, I saw there was another option that I could select, which is on the far right when I'm coding suggested codes. And these suggested codes are generated by AI. I will finish in a second. And you can see there are a number of other codes here: conflict, development, ethnic identity, tribalism, unity, that I did not come up with, but that the AI is suggesting. And that's been helpful in kind of trying to find a little bit more confidence in what I'm seeing. I still feel really skeptical about it. And so I'll just wrap up by saying, some of the opportunities, I feel a little bit more confident. I also don't know yet what the opportunities are. I think there are a lot of drawbacks to this. The AI lacks the context, the years of experience I've had doing research in South Sudan. I think there's a lot of value in the practice of analytical memos and drawing themes together on my own. It often oversimplifies. So for example, this is a summary of the observations I've done. Oops. And this is very, like, I'm an ethnographer, so I don't like the simplicity. I like the complexity. And so this doesn't vibe with me as much as I'd like it to. And then finally, I just want to say the ethical considerations of putting this through AI. I did not get the consent from teachers, and that feels really important to me. I know there is evidence of bias playing into some AI algorithms, and that feels worrisome to me. And so I will leave it at that. But thank you. Happy to talk about this more.
Great, thank you so much. Like Ken said, my name is Maya Call. I'm a PhD candidate now at the University of Pennsylvania. And like Aurelia, I'm really entering this from a position of not an expert on AI, little confused what I'm doing here, but I've just been at the stage of experimenting with different uses of AI in my own research. And so I'm happy to share how I've been thinking about it. And I'm approaching this work too, I want to just say, with two tensions. One is that my work really centers on teacher professionalism and teacher agency. And so I think of teaching as complex technical work as well as moral work. And so I have concerns about the use of AI in the classroom, specifically as a teaching intervention. And the second is that, I'm writing a dissertation in a moment when the field hasn't really coalesced around an understanding of what are appropriate uses of AI in research. And so I've been very cautious as I've approached this. That said, I'll just share three of the ways that I've been experimenting with AI from the perspective of someone who's just trying to test it out in my own research. So the first is, I think a lot of people have been using ChatGPT as a tool to debug code. So it's like working in Stata code, I've given it prompts and kind of error messages I've gotten, and it's been pretty helpful, more helpful and much more quickly helpful than just Googling around or can't always ask a peer to help me debug every line of code. So that's been really promising. And two other ways that I think are a little bit more complex is I've been doing work in my dissertation, doing survey work. And I was interested in identifying, I'm looking at how the reform contexts related to teaching and teacher education shape teachers' professional identities. And so I wanted to identify 4 states to survey teachers that I thought varied in a number of domains, one of which was how tightly regulated or deregulated the policy environment was for teacher education. And so I started that work by just coming up with a big list of different decision criteria, policies that I thought mattered in how tightly regulated that environment was. And I was going through all these tools and kind of describing states and putting them into a template to see which states were appropriate for my sampling. And then I reached a point where, there's a lot of states. And so I just wondered what it would look like to ask ChatGPT that question, and I gave it my decision criteria. It was things like, is, EdTPA a policy requirement in the state? What are the accreditation policies? And so I fed it information based on my own scan of the literature and asked it for states. And it ultimately sped up the process for me rather than going through all 50 states and knowing that I was comprehensive in how I was selecting my states to administer the survey in. I had some level of, I then took the states it recommended and then repeated my process. So it wasn't leaving it all up to ChatGPT, but it did help in sort of brainstorming for that. And then the third place I've been using it for that same study, I'm building and validating a measure for teacher professional identity. And one of the sub-skills I'm looking at is trying to translate a philosophical construct from Dora Santoro, teacher professional integrity, into a survey skill. And I'm new to this work of, survey skill development. And so I'd spent a lot of time, reading the philosophy, her work, kind of testing out different measures or for the subscale and doing cognitive interviews with teachers. And ultimately I needed a few more measures to add to the scale. And I was just couldn't think of anything else. And so I gave ChatGPT my list of measures that I already had. I gave it a definition and kind of a reference to the philosophical construct I was interested in. And I just asked it to kind of give me a few more measures. And it was surprisingly good. This is coming from someone who was extremely skeptical about kind of these uses of ChatGPT. And I, again, given the kind of lack of agreement in the field right now about what's appropriate to do with ChatGPT, I didn't take those measures verbatim, but it gave me ideas on how to build my own measures. And then I returned to the literature and kind of went through that same process of cognitive interviews and working with the theory. So those are kind of just 3 emergent ways I'm thinking about ChatGPT specifically as a research tool. I will say I've just been a little bit, I entered this work with a lot of skepticism, but I have been pleasantly surprised by some of these small applications. So I'll end there.
Hi, my name is Paul. As been introduced, I'm at Irvine. I didn't know that when I ordered the fish last night that I would be here, but here I am. I've been asked to talk about my experience with AI, and it's a little bit of a different bent where I've used a component of machine learning tools that's applied to statistical analysis. There's a package called Twain, and as you may have guessed from its name, it stands for toolkit for weighting and analysis of non-equivalent groups, just like the name suggests. I was at the RAND Corporation before my PhD program, and I met Dan McCaffrey in a project. He's at ETA now, but a group of statisticians developed this tool when they were both together they were all together at RAND, and it's been updated by other folks. It was developed about almost 20 years ago. So it's an old tool, but it's still used today. And it's just an applied machine learning of a particular algorithm that's just generating weights to balance non-equivalent groups, which is sort of a hard thing to do and not always perfect. And it comes up when you run an experiment, and I'm part of an experiment, and you're trying to, when you're using observational data and you don't have random variation, but you want to understand the effect of a manipulated variable, and you try and address the problem of balance. You know that they're going to be different, so you use these weights. And of course, traditional statistical methods have been used to try and balance people or groups on observed characteristics. It also comes up when you have survey data or experimental data. Some people give you the data, some people don't. Life happens, and attrition is a big problem. And so as you lose the data along the way, you start to introduce bias in your estimate, and you become less confident in the causal effects. And weights can try and address this. And of course, traditional statistical methods have done this too. What's nice is one innovation from this toolkit is they kind of moved on from optimizing on just predicting whether somebody would be in one condition versus another to optimizing on balance. And so it's kind of improved the model where they can more closely get at causal inference, or at least to the extent that machine learning can help us. But the key principle here that's been applied in other methodological advancements is you're just offloading the prediction portion of a causal analysis, and maybe machine learning can kind of get us closer. And so they're very imperfect, but I think they're useful, especially when we have limited data, and you can kind of characterize the bias that you might have in your estimate. The second innovation, I think, is that it really removed researcher degrees of freedom. I've heard like stories of professors when they were students in a dark room trying to make these weights work and having a lot of heartaches, but it kind of removes all of that, which can hopefully contribute to open science. So that's all. Thank you.
We're now moving to the panel discussion phase, and you got a late start, but the powers that be say we can go for 10 more minutes, and we'll be sure to get back to the audience. But let me start first with a question to you, Kristen. The digital divide, is it going to grow or shrink? And I guess part of that to address one of the questions we heard from is, part of that goes to the costs involved and the broader implications, as Gail raised, of the costs, because these systems take a lot. So can you tackle that really easy question?
Sure, let me give you the 30 seconds. So Khan Academy's mission is to provide a free world-class education to anyone, anywhere, and we are currently having to charge for Khanmigo. So that just for us is a tension and conflict. And the reason we're charging is because we get a bill every month from OpenAI for all those words that come in and out of the model and what that looks like. So why don't we use an open source model? Because right now, GPT-4 acts most like a tutor, follows our instructions of how to act like a tutor better than any other model that's out there. So we are optimistic that the innovation is going to continue. The speed right now of the innovation in this space is insane. So there's some reason for our optimism. And as that innovation happens, it should drive down a lot of the prices that we're seeing. But the other piece that we're doing, so one of the things we've moved to with Khan Academy is working with particularly districts that serve historically under-resourced communities and working to get these tools into those communities. And that's what we're continuing to do with philanthropic dollars and ways that we can then help and make sure this happens. But I think one of my concerns, and Mike Trucano is at Brookings right now, wrote a piece on this, is actually that we will end up with communities that are less resourced just having access to the technology, and more privileged communities having access to the technology and the people that build the relationships and to support it. So there could be a kind of a reverse digital divide that I think we also need to guard against.
Thank you. Samya, we heard concerns about as AI, starts to do stuff, what's going to be left? And can you address that question, particularly with respect to teachers?
Yeah. So, well, I'm going to summon Vygotsky in this room and think about what happens when we think of AI as a tool and the role that these tools play in supporting learning. And if we want to think about it from the point of scaffolding, it's just one kind of scaffolding that you're providing to students, which is basically a material scaffold or a tool. But for that to work appropriately, I strongly believe that human mediation is something that you cannot ignore or get rid of. And that's where there are so many experiments that already show with so many different technologies that people have used in classroom, that for us to be able to use it in a way that is beneficial for student well-being and learning, that human mediation, the social scaffolding there is as important as tool scaffolding. Oh yeah, and do want to separate scaffolding and scaffolds. And we've been only talking about scaffolds, which are these tools, but scaffolding is inherently a sociocultural process.
Great. Nia, I heard this interesting quote recently: more women are better for everyone.
I heard that too. It was like a very wise woman that said it, I think.
So can AI help make that truism more true in practice?
I mean, I think that, yes, and with a lot of hesitation, right? So a lot of the things that we're working towards. So I also said earlier in the talk, I don't think that majority students or men typically go into environments with the intention of performing or engaging in a less than desirable way. People are just not taught how to collaborate, but expected to collaborate and communicate. And what I think AI can really help us do is kind of multifaceted in the sense that it can help us identify differences, like I showed today briefly, like between certain populations of individuals, identify how consistent those differences are, because we can now do that really quickly at scale. We can explore lots and lots of different data sets and sort of say, is this data set, or is this sort of a wider problem? And the other thing it can do is allow us to identify critical moments to potentially intervene. And I say that because there's a lot that goes underneath that effort, but it allows us to find like when a conversation is starting to shift and there could be a place for intervention, right? To say, hey, why don't we follow up on what Susie said, or guide the conversation in a more inclusive way. And then I think thirdly is sort of AI as a teammate, where we can have people engage I mean, actually, you gave me an idea with that question because that I hadn't thought of, which is like having AI as a teammate where it's just like more women in the conversation, which is a great idea. But I was thinking more like, what if, you know, every team had like an inclusive, like kind of cheerleader that was like, which is one of the things we're going to explore. Like if you had somebody in there that was constantly kind of like giving props and like, oh, that's a great follow-up on what Ken said earlier. Oh, Shamya, you know what that makes me think of? And it just like drives this like good feeling of inclusion and sense of belonging and all of these things that lead to learning or problem solving or insert whatever thing is the outcome. So I think there are a lot of different ways that AI can help us address letting women take over the world.
Thank you, Nia. Ryan, another issue that came up, I think, in various ways in a couple of initial questions is the worry about student cheating. And maybe there's a complementary side to that Brian Reiser brought up of, well, if low-level skills can be done by AI, maybe this is an opportunity for us to shift our curriculum and attention to higher level skills. So can you comment on those two potentially related ideas?
Sure. That's a great set of topics. So first of all, I do think that we're seeing a transformation in which skills really people need to know. And I'll give an example from my own practice. I used to program. Ken knows that years ago I used to program, right? And then it became a point where I couldn't program anymore because even though I could kind of read Python and kind of do it if I really forced it, I didn't know all the operators and I didn't, you know, I couldn't in a practical amount of time do anything. Well, with ChatGPT now, I can program again and I can program faster and better than I can ask a grad student to do it and go back and forth with them because ask it to do something, it gives me code, I can read the code and interpret it to understand whether it's doing what I wanted. I can run it, I can test it, I can check it. So the ability to evaluate, to check, to understand becomes much more relevant than the ability to produce. And so I do think that much of our current system is based on produce, not on evaluate and check, and I think that's a change. I think that that's a good thing that we adapt to that because I think that when it comes to adapt to figuring out whether what a student produced is generated by a large language model or not, I hate to say this, we're basically doomed, right? Like the current level of technology, yes, there are engines that can check. And if you get the student who just types in a simple prompt to ChatGPT or to Llama or something and puts in exactly what they got with no modification, this stuff will catch them. But if you just tell the large language model, hey, make it hard for someone to tell this came from a large language model, or if you use one of the many tools commercially that now wrap around them and help it make it obfuscate it better, it's really hard to catch. And I think this is one of those cases where the ill-intentioned will always outcompete the people who are trying to catch them. So I think that we'd better start adapting to it. But we can ban it, but we won't be able to catch it if we ban it. And so alternatively, we may want to revise our thinking and think, what are the human skills now that are particularly value added?
I think the point about evaluative skills is super critical because we know as much as they amaze us, they're often wrong, these large language models, but it can be subtle, especially when it's wrong in a way that sounds like it's quite right. I have a lot more questions for this panel, but I want to get back to the audience and invite any of you to come up and ask questions. Great.
Hi, thanks for your work. I was wondering, especially for people who are working with, the virtual TA and the teaching resources for teachers, how you think about your work connected to the labor issues in education, and how you feel like sort of the research that you're doing on AI can connect to some of the labor issues facing educators at the graduate level for TAs, and also in the classroom level.
So
that's directed to you, Ryan. Yep.
GPTA is not replacing our TAs, and I don't think it'll do so anytime soon. But it's creating, and they still have a very important role. But it's being more. I think the key is to be more, not to just replace. Yes, automated grading can eliminate the rote aspects of grading, and that can give us time to focus on the deeper parts of it. And it can answer questions at 4 in the morning, and that's fantastic. It won't be replacing office hours tomorrow.
Yeah, I think that I would echo that, which is we know the research that says for students who have a person in their school that they know cares about them and their outcomes, we see better graduation rates. We see better rates of moving on to higher education. AI is not going to be that thing that cares about the student and the student cares if they come to class, asks them what's going on in their day. And I think our challenge from a policy perspective is going to make sure that if AI can do some of the tasks that are more rote and human, we don't let that mean, oh, we don't need the humans in the classroom.
Go to another question.
I have a question about the kind of feedback that the AI systems are providing. That tend to focus on correcting what's called error. There's an important teaching practice now that's called asset-oriented evaluation. And the basic idea is that most mathematical and scientific thinking is a mix of actually productive ideas and also things that are imperfect and need some kind of mitigation. And asset-oriented thinking doesn't focus primarily on error, but on the positive aspects of what the students produce, and then going on to mitigate what next has to be done to improve what happened. But I wonder to what extent that orientation is, and I think this is an important equity issue, to what extent the feedback builds on the positive aspects of what students are expected in the system to do.
You want to take that on, Kristen? I know that kind of research base can be part of the prompting. So that's part of the answer. You can prompt, right?
Yeah.
But can I add another element to it? I guess another part of this question is developing a history of knowledge about this particular student, and maybe that's still on the frontier.
Yeah, so both of those, one of the really interesting things about the large language models is you can give it instructions to respond how you want it to. So we can say, when we can, put in, we want you to act in the way that Gracer Person in Magliano 1995 tutor moves, like do those. So in that way, you can make it act and respond based on, if you wanted to do asset-based kinds of feedback, you could put that into the prompt and it would be moving through those. So, and you don't have to know how to code to do it. You can just tell it in plain language to do those things. The other piece that Ken is getting at is right now for us in most of these, Khanmigo doesn't have a history of the student, doesn't have that student profile. That's one of the things that is next on our list, is thinking about what does it know about me as a student, and where is the line between what it knows about me as a student being helpful and what it knows about me as a student being creepy when it knows that. And so there's a lot of pieces around that, but if I'm a student and it knows that what my strengths are, it knows more of my background, it can act in ways more like it knows me as a person and can adjust and talk about what my strengths and what I'm bringing to this interaction.
Can I chime in quickly?
Yes, please do so.
Yeah. Also one of the inherent equity issues here is these large models that are available, especially like maybe the ones from OpenAI or like Facebook and whatnot. They are so data hungry that it's going to be very difficult for you to train these models to respond sometimes to the assets that students are bringing from their lived experiences that may not necessarily be in white mainstream English. A collaboration that I'm working on right now is for rural students in Wisconsin in classrooms that are majority Latinx. And we are seeing that the models that are actually open source, like Hugging Face, that have been trained on both English and Spanish, and hopefully were done in a little bit more ethical way than exploitative labor from Africa, tends to be working better when you are looking at providing maybe feedback for students who may be translanguaging between English and Spanish.
Hello, everybody. First of all, thank you for an incredibly interesting panel. I really learned a lot. I don't know much about this, and I thought it was incredibly comprehensive, and everybody did a great job. So thank you so much. I have a question about the use of AI for interpretation of text. Okay, so I'm going to give you two examples. One, we have used. I mean, some of the qualitative analysis programs, which one of the speakers spoke about, like Atlas TI and Hyper Research and what have you, also claim to be able to come up with codes. But for many years now, we've used, you're shaking your head, I know you agree with me.
Yeah.
But for many years, we have used those programs, and we always have to completely redo the coding system. I'm talking about coming up with the codes, not, and obviously the consequence, how you code things once you come up with them. And they're so really not helpful. They're inaccurate. They read literally instead of actually substantively, where you actually dig down and understand what somebody's saying to you and what have you. So we stopped doing that. So here's question number one. Question number one is, and then I have a related question, is about the use of AI for those kinds of purposes, particularly in coding of qualitative data, which we've done for many years. But what makes this system that you're suggesting more reliable, more valid, if you will? I think that's a better term. So that's question number one. How do we know? How do you know? Because we have to cross-check. We actually stopped doing it. And now our teams are going back and coding everything, coming up with codes, and then subsequently coding everything by hand. It's a real pain, by the way, as you know. You all know that. Okay, so that's question number one. So here's question number two. And it's related, it's about interpretation of text. And, I know that there's a recent East Coast court case among law firms that have used AI to come up with, summaries of text, interpretation of text, and what have you. And it didn't work out very well. And now those firms are backing off of using that. Now, presumably they have high capacity in this regard. So if that's a problem in interpreting basic text, same way I'm using the example of coding, then why would we be able to use it? Okay, and look, I understand that this can be tinkered with and this can be changed. And so this is not a blanket criticism. It's an honest question. I'm sorry. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Anyway, I'd like if you could sort of ponder that for a bit.
Great. Yeah. Those are two great questions. And Aurelia did talk about her experiences. And I think part of that was things are changing fast. And if I can just chime in, one of the things about these large language models is they are accumulating a lot of material that's out there on the internet, and maybe that is relevant to your coding. And maybe they will come up with good ideas. But I think this field sometimes says human in the loop, but I actually like it the other way around, like AI, a little bit of AI in the loop and a lot of human in the loop, right? We still have to do all those proper checks on our coding categories. And we have to get better at critical evaluation because the production is happening so much faster now. Other panelist comments on this?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of covered what I was going to say. I think the way, maybe Ryan can speak to this more, but the little bit of qualitative coding that we've used with, or that we've had AI help with, there's always a huge component of us being in the loop, or the AI being in the loop. So nothing is coded and then not looked at again. So that's the way that we're approaching it. Now, we haven't done a ton of it yet in my lab, but maybe Ryan can add to that. But I think it's a valid concern. Well, I mean, one of the advantages is that it can do it really quickly. So it's a lot easier to sanity check something than it is to actually decide out of all of the codes. So it narrows, I mean, it's a lot less cognitive effort.
And I think to be slightly more careful about it, that's a great hypothesis, right? Yeah, and I think we do need more research to check that. And I've seen cases, I saw one of my new students was working with medical educators and asked them to give feedback on ChatGPT's categorization of their med student responses as to its Bloom's level, the Bloom's taxonomy. And the inter-rater reliability was super high. And as I looked into this more and thought about it and actually looked at some of their ratings, it's like, what do medical instructors really know about Bloom's taxonomy?
Yeah.
And basically the inter-rater reliability was so high because I think they were just, yeah, that sounds good, right? And accepting it. So we definitely have to be careful about these things. And I think the expertise level of our human coders is super critical, because the more novice you are in the more domain, the more likely you're going to incorrectly accept the AI's advice.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much again for this thought provoking session. I think my question is around some of the assumptions. I think some comments were around like kind of how AI is like data hungry, and like more data, the better. And I think it has some assumptions around that all data or all knowledge like should be shared or should be used. And so I think, are there ways that AI or one, AI can be used to actually not share data or like be protective of data? And I don't know if that's a potential direction or possibility, or kind of thinking about families and communities to continue to protect spaces and protect stories and protect knowledge that should not be shared in light of the kind of onslaught of AI kind of being ongoing sites of surveillance potentially,
Partly concerned with misinformation spreading in that data or the kind of rights of the data providers that are sometimes ignored.
Yeah, I think it's more like the protection of stories and the protection of what should be shared, and not assuming that all knowledge, should be shared for everyone.
Right.
Thoughts
I-
about it?
We have talked a lot, it's easy to make a list of ethical AI principles, but what's interesting is when they come into tension with each other. And I think there's a tension between data privacy and wanting unbiased models. And so, for instance, the districts that we work with, we have an agreement, and we have the agreement with OpenAI that none of the data that students input into the Conmigo interface is used to train the models, which is good. That's our value of data privacy. That's their data. They own that data. On the other hand, the models would be better if they were using data, particularly data from those students who are from non-traditional backgrounds or historically under-resourced backgrounds. That would improve the model. So how do we deal with that tension? And I think that's something we're still trying to figure out.
I think we have time for one more question, Daniel.
It's not actually a question. I wanted to respond to the coding question a little bit more, just to remind that we're not on ground zero here. We've been working on language models and natural language processing, and also incorporating the free large language models for 2 decades. And so there's a great deal of evidence that we've just done a lot of work on creating coding systems and benchmarking them, and then creating automated feedback systems. So this is just making it faster. So all of the linguistics and the large language models and the semantic models that have been going into these pedagogical models that provide feedback to students are now just quicker to access and more public through ChatGPT.
It's like you're king to respond, Ryan?
I wasn't, but I will.
Okay. Well,
I was just sitting forward. Well, first of all, I think it's worth, acknowledging Danielle and her colleagues and her whole community's extensive work on this over many years that have put us in the situation where these models exist, and where we can use it for these kind of purposes. I actually think that discovering qualitative codes from whole cloth was really hard, and the tools for it weren't very good until fairly recently. But I will say, and we are explicitly evaluating this continuum of human to fully AI development of these codes. In our first round, there were no differences in human beings' ability to use them for inter-rater get inter-rater reliability. They were all kind of just below bar. And I, as one of the people who've been doing some of the coding, completely blinded to condition, have not been able to tell which is which. So we'll see if that comes out. But I think that these new tools have some real advances in the discovery of codes. And if we don't have it this year, I think we're going to have it in 2 or 3 years.
In playing with it, I just find that I know how many analyses I've done that took, some took years, some took, months, and the iterations on doing a topic model and then doing this and then doing that. And you just feed it in and it's like, oh, okay, thanks. And it did it.
So we are at time, and I think this issue illustrates more generally that there are opportunities and challenges with it, and more generally here, which I think is actually good news for the future of research, because there's a lot to be done to leverage those opportunities and take on those challenges. So thanks to the panel, and thanks for your great time.